He's a curator at the Ringling Museum, as I'm sure you all know, and I've actually never heard him speak, even though I've been in town here for about 20 years, but everyone I've talked to about this meeting this evening says they've heard him speak, and they were going to be sure to be here because they want to hear him speak again. So, Ron, welcome very much to Timesifters.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me all right? It's a wonderful aspect to our history in Sarasota to be able to share information about early people that have really made such a difference to our community. And of course, John and Charles both were very instrumental in our growth here in Sarasota. So I have wonderful images that hopefully you'll enjoy. The very first image is the cabin in McGregor, Iowa, where John Ringling was born. So this is a wonderful early image. This is around 1866 is when John was born. You'll see that, if I can get this working. This is a nice image that we've recently acquired of Charles Ringling. That's really the two boys that did the most expansion to Sarasota. Charles lived right next door to where Katazan is today, which is now New College, another beautiful institution that has 3 historic buildings on that property. And of course, we have quite a number on the Ringling property as well, on the 66 acres. Charles was 2 years older than John, so he was born in 1864. These came from the Circus World collection in Baraboo, Wisconsin. They've shared a great deal with us the last few years that has really helped to fill in lots of the different holes in our information about the Ringlings. This is Edith Conway. This is the first marriage of the boys, the 5 boys that started the circus. So this is in the late 1800s that he married Edith Conway, who was really his childhood girlfriend. She was, I think, 14 when he met her as a young girl, taught her piano, and wooed her as she became old enough to be his bride. Quite an interesting story. And a wonderful early image of John. This is when he's 16 years old. This is when he was actually beginning the circus. The 5 boys created that wonderful experience for the American people. They did start basically as a comedy group to begin with. And then John was the singer for the beginning aspect to their involvement with the circus. And the comedian, he was the Dutch comedian. Here are the 4 of them. You can see that John is on the far left here and Charles is in the upper right. And this is Otto and Al Ringling, who actually started the circus. That's the oldest boy. These are wonderful images of John as the dude. So this is when he's 16 and 17 years old. So this is really a wonderful find. We have around 5 images of this studio portrait of him in different poses. He was definitely the most imposing figure of the 5 boys. He was almost 6 feet 4 inches tall. He was right under 6'4", and a very striking gentleman. And of course, all of them were very successful, all of them millionaires from the circus. And of course, they expanded their horizons, all started different companies. Charles and John were the most successful of all of them. And Alf T. actually lived in our community as well. His property was up in the Whitfield Estate area. And he owned something like 220 acres in that area, and then sold it to the Whitfield Estates. The family did, after his death. So that would have been around 1919. Another wonderful early image of John. It's interesting, tonight I'm not really talking about his collection particularly. I'm trying to just give you the setting of their early life and as they went through the years through Sarasota's expansion. But it's nice to know that you're all archaeologists or at least interested in the antiquities. And John Ringling was interested as well. You know, he purchased a huge amount of artwork throughout Europe as well as America at auction and at sales. And the Metropolitan Museum of Art actually was deaccessioning a great number of the collection there of duplicate pieces. So they were pieces that were similar to or very close in design of what they already had. So it's unusual for a museum to deaccession such a large grouping. But John Ringling had the intelligence always to involve people that knew what they were doing. So he hired the curator of the Met to guide him through buying the best pieces that were going up for auction. So he acquired almost 3,000 pieces. And that's just the kind of intelligence John Ringling had. And really, people don't realize just how intelligent he was, and Mable as well. They both were extremely smart, and anyone that's done interviews about them have always noted that they were both so involved and intelligent on everything that they were doing. I do hope that someday the museum will expand and actually have more of the antiquities on display. He had antiquities that were carved heads that are spectacular, from very large to the most minute that had been taken out of all of the tombs. He collected 600 glass ampules that are like 1st to 3rd century. Just an incredible collection. And that's how he collected paintings as well. He acquired, unfortunately, a lot of the books have published that he would buy if cheap, or buy if available, that he could make a deal in order to acquire these things. And I think that's such a misrepresentation of his collecting. Definitely he may have been interested in certain aspects of acquiring something that may not be the most expensive, but he tried to fill in all different areas of his collecting with the Italian Baroque collection. He really was focused very much on making that a world-famous collection for this community. So I really hate any kind of negative writings in the past that has been misinterpreted. The more you learn about the Ringlings, the more you really fall in love with the story. And I've been at the Ringling for 37 years. So I've actually lived through so many aspects of its growth. When I first started at the Ringling, it was a very small town, quiet little museum that was just primarily the Circus Museum, the Art Museum, and Cartezan. And in that, it had drop ceilings in the galleries. It had carpeting in the galleries as well that was shag carpeting. It's very bizarre to think of what it looks like at this time period compared to today. They had temporary walls up and down the main corridors of the Art Museum with diamond-shaped walls to add more paintings in order to get all the paintings in the vaults up on the walls, not really displaying the highest quality or really interpreting the things, but more just having quantity out rather than quality. So that really wasn't good for our reputation as well. And so then we've had really fabulous directors come in and do renovations to the Art Museum that really did scholarly publications and changed all of the interpretations and really brought out the very finest paintings. And today we've kept that, and it's an amazing place to be. And I'm very happy that I was able to stay this long at an institution that was so interesting. But the actual legacy story is what made me fall in love with the institution to begin with, because it's not only a love story between John Ringling and this beautiful woman that you see here, Mabel Burton Ringling, but it's also a story of falling in love with the community and them really investing millions upon millions into this community, hoping to make this city expand and become a world-class resort, which I think the Ringlings would be so pleased to see it actually has happened and is continuing to be a better and more beautiful place to live. Mabel is really an interesting aspect because she's a mystery, because not a great deal of information's ever really been published about her. She always liked to be his support system, but always in the background. So it's an interesting aspect that she allowed him to always be the big man and the power behind everything they're doing. But in actuality, she was the person that actually finished the projects that he would start. She would be working with the architects, building the art museum, building Katazan. He would be a night person that would be enjoying his sleep during the day while she's actually dealing with the activity that's happening and what has made him so famous in this community. A lot of that is because of her. So it's a wonderful tribute to her. And Katazan is a wonderful aspect to her history because she worked with architects and builders and all aspects of the artistic qualities of the house. She's quite a beautiful woman as well. This is 1905, the year they married. These were shared with me by Ringling, actually Burton family archives. So I've gotten to know almost all of the relatives that have responded to my inquiring about the families. So this particular family lives in Madison, Wisconsin. And then there's others that are in Santa Fe and all over the country that they've all dispersed, and they are very interested in their family history. She looks like a Russian empress here, don't you think, in her ermine? The year they married, 1905, they acquired this beautiful Pullman train car. This is right under 80 feet long. This would have been similar to having a Learjet today. Very few Americans had private train cars that were an individual. Lots of companies had them, but as an individual, he was a millionaire at this time, and it was a wonderful way of showing his power and his wealth, and also providing him the wonderful aspects of privacy for a newly married couple to travel with the circus. And he actually traveled on this train a great deal, planning out where the circuses would go, what cities they would travel to, and setting up business transactions for making all of the plans for housing and food. So it's a very important aspect to their history. And of course, we've done a complete restoration on this, and it's a magnificent aspect to our property today. The interior is just spectacular. All of the different wood grains, they have satin wood and mahoganies within. It's very much like Katazan as far as the rich textures, the velvets. And of course, Mabel picked everything that you see in the train for, of course, her comfort and her artistic aspect. This wonderful banquette. These all lay down and create a bed as well, so there's a bed above and below. If you haven't been to the museum and viewed the train, it's definitely worth a trip. This is a nice image of them in Chicago. This is around 1910. And the Ringlings lived in Chicago until they moved to Manhattan, which was in 1910. They sold the property in Chicago and moved to 636 Fifth Avenue, this is the only image that I can find of the actual structure. It's a spectacular high-rise, and they had the complete floor for their apartment. And Ralph Capels is the reason the Ringlings came to Sarasota. They came to visit Ralph and Ellen Capels in 1909. And I think the Ringlings were so successful and wanting to expand their horizons, obviously, wanting to move to New York. And I think probably Mabel enjoyed country life as much as we do today with all the nature and the beauty. I think she really missed that because both of them came from very humble beginnings in small communities. So I think coming to Sarasota and seeing its natural beauty And of course, an undeveloped area was very appealing. So they had their main residence at 636 Fifth Avenue. Then they came down and bought this in 1911. So they kept coming back to Ralph and Ellen to see if they really liked the community, and finally invested. So they bought 20 acres on the waterfront where Katazan is today. And it was called Palms Elysian. A house came with the land. And it was a very beautiful 12-room estate. You can see how lush and beautiful. All the newspaper articles will talk about Mable creating it as very much a public park setting. That she loved her gardening, very much a part of who she is. She became, of course, later the first president of the Sarasota Garden Club, the Founders Circle, who is celebrating their 90th anniversary this year. And she was the very first president. So she really was very involved with the landscaping of the museum as well, all of its property. And you can see that on this level, this is the basement of Katazan. So when they raised the building, they moved the actual house up across from the Rose Garden around 1925, and then built Katazan exactly on this site. And what we have here is the basement of Katazan, the beach level. They constructed an area in the water to dry it out, and then build the terrace above it. So the marble terrace that you enjoy is in this area. And so these steps are actually in the basement of Katazan. This is the original house. These are from Owen Burns' collection, who was John Ringling's partner. It's such a shame that this building was torn down in the 50s. It was on the property throughout the Ringlings' lives, and the first director felt that it had too much termite damage, that it needed to be removed. So it was torn down. And it's a big part of our history. It's such a shame that that's gone. And you can see that these are the original walkways that we have today. It's the original driveway for them. Has a witching ball here for the garden. And of course, once they invested in the property here, they actually advertised buying property in Shell Beach, which is the area Katazan is at today. That was a subdivision that was designed in the 1890s. And they were actually advertising, once the Ringlings purchased, as these are the celebrities that live in the community. So they published maps within this that would show the actual locations, like going to Hollywood and seeing where the different movie stars live today. So it was interesting that they were really wanting to get them involved in the community to really expand Sarasota. They knew that the Ringlings had the money to actually do something for the community. And this is a wonderful aspect of Mabel's history. The very first thing she did when they moved into the house was to build this rose garden. So these are the very earliest images that we have of the rose garden. And you can see how it's been laid out. It has the columns. It's hard to see much detail, but there's 54 cement columns that have been poured and put here. They're hoping to actually have those restored in the next few years, because they're made of tabby, which is, of course, cement with shell. And it has an iron armature inside that is expanded. So they are cracking, much like the terracotta on Katazan, where it has expanded so much it's breaking apart the actual material. So hopefully that will be restored in the next few years. It's a beautiful aspect to the property. It's the oldest rose garden in the South. It's a beautiful wagon wheel design with a central gazebo. And this lovely Hurricane Irma destroyed the gazebo recently. So they're having to replace that. They did enjoy all the luxuries of the time period. This is the Wethia. This is one of their first yachts that they owned. So they enjoyed going out on the bayfront, entertaining the wealthy in Sarasota. The Capels were very good friends. They would go fishing with them. All of Mabel Ringling's women's groups that she was part of would go out on the different boats and enjoy the nature here. Mabel is 36 here. She's the one that really enjoyed the yachts more than John. I think John had them as a status symbol and a way of getting people involved with different aspects of his expansion here. But Mabel really embraced it as a way to entertain, as a tool for showing people a good time when they were visiting the property. And you can see how luxurious they were inside. They're very much like the interior of the Pullman train car. Same with the banquettes of velvet, the inset cabinets that are very much like the train car, with a desk or a buffet where you could have things that would not tip as you would be on the water. All these images came from different boating magazines of the day. So all of his purchases were always highly shown in different magazines and books, showing their wealth and importance in community. This is a wonderful one showing John and Mabel here. This one is Edith Ringling. So Edith also loved boating as well. So they all had yachts. And I'm sure the Bishops up in Bradenton had yachts, as well as the Selbys had a wonderful yacht in town. The Ringlings had the largest always. Bigger and better. That was John's motto. So this is the 125-foot Zolifus. This one he actually ordered in 1922. So it's the last of the yachts that he had ordered. And it's probably the most luxurious that has been in this community in that time period. Here's Mabel with her dog Fifi on the Zolifus. And it's been wonderful working with all of the history of the Ringling, because each one of the yacht captains had different time periods of working for John and Mabel. And so I know of 3 different yacht captains from the years that I've worked here. And they've shared wonderful imagery that their family had collected and stories that really enrich our history. These are so beautiful. There's a display on the 2nd level of Cartezan, if you're interested in seeing these closer, that's in the servants' wing. And so there's 2 rooms that show all of these images with the actual steering wheel of the yacht. Lots of the furniture came from major estates, like the 2 needlepoint chairs here from John Jacob Astor Estate in New York. Beautifully appointed. And it was quite an immense vessel. And of course, John was advertising all of the aspects of expanding Sarasota as spend the summer this winter in Sarasota, which is a wonderful aspect to his early time period. One of the very first places that he acquired is Golden Gate Point, which was at that time Cedar Point. And you can see the, does this have a...
The middle button? Yeah.
Oop. Maybe not. Middle here? Nope. What am I doing?
Okay, let me get you back up full screen. So in between the left and the right, where the star is?
Right here in the center.
Yeah, that should be the pointer. There you
Okay,
go.
so this is the Yacht and Automobile Club. That's the very first thing that he purchased outside of the property that the museum is on today. So it's a wonderful structure here. And of course, with the purchase of this, he bought Cedar Point and was starting to develop this as well. Another view. So this was a defunct Yacht and Automobile Club that was not successful. And so the Ringlings purchased this, and in a few years, Mabel Ringling takes this and converts it to the Sunset Apartments. And so it's the very first of the luxury apartments on the waterfront at this time period. She was very involved in every aspect of his business. It's really not discussed that much because it's always about the Ringlings as far as the boys. And Mabel really decorated everything that he would purchase. She worked very closely with all the architects. And when you read interviews from those architects, they say just how incredible of a woman she was. And of course, the Causeway. This is a wonderful aspect to his properties because he was buying all those barrier islands. And it's great that he was able to spend right under $1 million building this. And then at the end of it, he donated that to the community. So that shows his incredible intelligence to actually involve the community because he wanted that business to continue out to his islands. And this is a great picture of Mabel inside his Rolls Royce. And he's the very first car to go across the Causeway. And that was the Tsarina, which is a wonderful Rolls Royce that had been made for the Romanovs. And they could not afford it, so John Ringling acquired this and was in the car museum across the street from the Ringling for so many years. And then they sold it to a collector in Las Vegas, and now it's in Europe for sale for $8 million. It's such a shame that that got away from us. So this is Bird Key. You can see this is the original Bird Key Mansion. So the Ringlings bought this in 1922 as they were expanding, buying all the different islands. First thing he did, of course, is dredge in an area so that you could drive out to the island from his Causeway. It's a magnificent building that he kept until his death. So this was something very special to him. His sister moved into that in the 30s and stayed in it until her death. But this is the interior. There's not many images of the interior. Family members, the great-granddaughter of Ida Ringling, has given me family movies that show them having parties in this house. And it's lovely to see the activity and how beautiful the house is. And of course, this is Bird Key today. So it's expanded quite a bit from the original. And of course, John J. Watson was hired to design Lido and St. Armand's Circle. So this is a wonderful aspect to the history of all of those islands. You can see he had a John Ringling Estates that was designed to be upper scale housing. He had 3 wonderful buildings that were created by Dwight James Baum, who's the architect of Katazan, to actually have spec houses on the property so that they could have an office building out on St. Armand's. Here's your original design. And here's the original office building that's now Café Europe on St. Armand's Circle. So this was his real estate offices. And John Ringling North, Ida Ringling's son, is the man that used to run this for him. They were all a very tight family. And of course, here are the spec houses that I had mentioned. So these are all 3 designed by Dwight James Baum. 2 of them are still standing. The 3rd one was torn down in the 60s. If any of you know Joyce and Jeff Hart, they live in this house. We've done many homes tours for the Sarasota Alliance for Historic Preservation, and this house has been on many of those tours. And this is directly next door to that house. It's another of the spec houses. All Mediterranean revival to look like the property that we have as our museum. They were developing that as a wonderful part of our history. It is on the local designation. And this is a wonderful early shot of course, St. Armand's and Lido Shores. You can see the garden sculpture. They really spent so much money on planting palm trees, really beautifying all of the community with the roadways, every aspect. And of course, they still have quite a few pieces out there today. I know they've replaced quite a few that have been broken, but there's still quite a few original pieces there. And of course, all the islands along the way. Coon Key and Otter Key. And this is, of course, the property that he had owned that John Ringling North donated for them to build Plymouth Harbor. And of course, Lido Shores. And this is, of course, the old Ritz-Carlton. And so they owned all this property on Longboat Key. Spectacular amount of property. And over in this area, they had a landscape business where you could buy gravel by the yard. You could buy the palm trees to actually plant all the yards that you were starting to design on all of his islands. So he was very smart about having all aspects available. Now this is during the boom years, which early 1920 to 1926, it was really a thriving business. And then of course everything went bust. So for him to invest all this money was spectacular, and he did think he would make a great deal of money from it. But even after the property went bust, he still was very involved with all the property, and I don't think wanted to give up any of that. It was definitely his dream to see this happen. Warren and Wetmore were the architects of this Ritz-Carlton. They had done Grand Central Station in New York City. So he brought down the best of the best. When he started designing the art museum, he brought down John J. Watson, who also was someone that had worked on the central block of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So he really brought people that were accomplished, very important in their field. And of course, when they decided to start on Katazan, they hired the person that had won Best Architect that year from the Architectural League of New York, Dwight James Baum. And then, of course, Dwight James Baum opened an office here and did many buildings that are our public buildings in Sarasota. So he really wanted to make this a spectacular community with New York spectacular architects as well. Really established and wonderful history of New York. Such a shame that this was never completed. These images are from Florida Memory, which is one of the state archives. If you enjoy pulling up architecture, it's a wonderful archive to pull up. And of course, he had purchased a huge amount of property east of town. So where Myakka State Park is today, that was Bertha Palmer's property. He bought 66,000 acres from that area up to Sarasota. And then he sold half of that to his brother Charles, and they both were planning on developing that as well. He had worked with trying to find oil in Florida. He investigated all the way to Jacksonville. So he really was a mover and shaker, always hunting for a new angle, a new aspect of developing Florida. This is a wonderful picture of him in front of Katazan. He was worth $200 million in 1925, considered 13th richest man in America. Now the number there, it does vary. Some say 10th most wealthy. You know, there's so many different descriptions, but definitely in the top 20 of American wealth. And the different people that came to Katazan were many friends from Manhattan. They really loved living in New York. They loved the arts, they loved the museums, they loved the opera. So, and lots of politicians and entertainment field, producers, Broadway actors, they were all friends of the Ringlings. So Al Smith was a dear friend of John Ringling. Jimmy Walker, all of them on the cover of Time the same year or maybe the year after John Ringling. Mr. Ziegfeld, very good friends with the Ringlings. And Billy Burke is his wife, Glinda the Good Witch from Wizard of Oz. And her father had been a circus clown. and of course, many presidents. He is entertaining President Calvin Coolidge in Washington, D.C. when the circus came to the area. And this is a very wonderful portrait of Owen Burns, who was John Ringling's partner. He really depended so much on Owen Burns all the years of buying up the property to actually start expanding. And then this is Dwight James Baum on the right-hand side, that sophisticated architect from Manhattan that was hired to do Cartezan. This is the Gatehouse, so this is your entry point on our property today. And it was, of course, the entry point then as well. Here it is today. It's changed a bit with the cement jungle behind it. As you can see, this is a new glass pavilion that's been built recently and will open in January. And a wonderful aerial view showing how spectacular Cartezan is. It's such a treasure. Now, of course, I might be prejudiced, but it is a wonderful treasure for our community because it's one of the largest of the historic houses in Florida. There's only 3 historic house museums in Florida of this period, which is the Gilded Age. And you have the Flagler Mansion in West Palm Beach, or in Palm Beach proper. And in Vizcaya in Miami, that's another wonderful estate, and then Cartezan. So if you're interested in that time period, it's so nice that this is one that's been included in that. It's, of course, a 36,000 square foot mansion that's 5 stories tall, plus a basement, a full basement 200 feet wide. You can see this incredible terrace done in a chevron ancient pattern that's quite spectacular in different colors of marble. And this gorgeous barrel tile roof. And of course, the tower is my favorite aspect of the property. It's just a spectacular aspect. And you can see the 5th story. It has a wonderful frieze that goes around the tower that actually shows a zodiac. And so when you're actually facing the front of the house, Mabel's Pisces is the first thing you see. So she's making claim that this is her property, obviously. This is her house. She worked with the architect, took him to Venice with her twice in order to show exactly what she wanted made for this estate. You can see this quadrifoil pattern. Everything is a flora and fauna design on the house. So it may be a historic and beautiful pattern from Venice, but it also is a 4-leaf flower. And every aspect that you look at, these wonderful eaves on the roof line, it has a sunflower with a brilliant blue background. So everything really is a very personal expression of Mable Ringling. The house truly was a gift to her because John obviously had the money to support whatever he wanted, so he gave her a project towards the end of her life. And I'm sure that he knew that she was becoming ill with diabetes and Addison's disease. So the diabetes were definitely taking effect. And I think this was a way of giving her a project that would keep her occupied and very happy. At least I hope so. And all of this incredible terracotta is not Italian terracotta. Everyone likes to make this so much more grand and interesting, but you have to actually stick to facts. This is made in Crumlin, Pennsylvania by O.W. Ketchum Terracotta Works. And it's a wonderful company that created all of this, thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces for Cartezan. They assembled it into a warehouse in Philadelphia and then barged them down. So it's definitely a wonderful aspect, but it's not Italian terracotta that was brought over from another building. It's fun to hear the stories that actually evolve when you've been there so long. It's truly a beautiful structure. And of course, now we have a Campiello here that is wonderful for parties and weddings. And it was a wonderful aspect of Mr. Bolger, who was one of our wonderful patrons in our community. He donated $1,200,000 to build the Campiello, as well as this promenade that goes along the waterfront, plant it to what Mable Ringling had originally with all of these palm trees. And it took a lot of the stress and parties away from Corazon that was always here when we rent out our property. So it's really helped keep the house up after we've done a $15 million restoration. That's something you really need to plan out when you do something. You need to continue to keep it in good condition. And it's a lovely thing when a donor can realize he can help in that way. He's done many things for the museum. This is the early images that either Mable has taken or the architect. So this is the interior of the front door and the foyer. Lots of objects came from very important estates. So as they were collecting for not only their own personal home, they started collecting for the art museum as well. They only collected art for 6 years to create the art museum that we have today. So these are spectacular chairs that came from the estate that's called Darlington in it's in Mahwah, New Jersey. And it's a fantastic suite of furniture that's now in the ballroom. Every aspect of the house really reflects Mable collecting in these wonderful sales that were being put on because skyscrapers were being built up and down Fifth Avenue and buildings were coming down. So they knew the buildings and the collections, so they would go and buy different historic things that they really appreciated. So this is the court. You can see all of these objects all came from Newport, Rhode Island, from the most magnificent of Gilded Age houses, Marble House, another Richard Morris Hunt estate that's just spectacular. John bought almost 400 items from that estate that truly was in one room called the Gothic Museum. Alva Vanderbilt divorced her husband and decided to deaccession all of her museum pieces from that room. So John Ringling worked with Lord Devine to actually acquire these pieces. This is the formal dining room. You can see this came from the same estate in Mahwah, New Jersey called Darlington. The table came from the same estate. These are such beautiful pieces. He bought this originally as a Velázquez, but it has turned out to be his main chief assistant in his studio, and his name was Mazzo, very important painter that married his daughter. And so this has gone to the Prado for exhibition. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and it came from the Royal Collection of Madrid. And the piece below is another piece that's quite lovely, that the original is in Versailles in the Cabinet du Roi, which was the king's private chamber. And so this is a reproduction that would have been built probably around 1890s from one of those Gilded Age estates. So it's very much the kind of furniture that they loved throughout the house. They didn't have children, obviously, so they wanted things that are more beautiful and important for history, where Charles and Edith had more of a comfortable house, very beautiful, but more comfortable for their children. They had a boy and a girl, and obviously had more of a family situation. So here's the original piece that one you just saw was fashioned from. And here's the fabulous Mazzo piece. And if you love jewelry, Elizabeth Taylor had a very early royal piece of jewelry that was a pearl. She wears that pearl up in her hair. So it's a very famous piece that had been passed down through so many royal families. It's fun to see on this painting. And of course, the palace it came from. John Ringling acquired so much from such important collections in Europe. And of course, he did have guidance to buy a great deal of that, which was Julius Böhler and Lord Devine, obviously, both very important to his collecting. These are gorgeous chairs that are in the foyer. And these are from the George J. Gould estate, which was in Lakewood, New Jersey. And you can see the chairs in the original building. Here's the estate. So all of these mansions were near their summer estate, which was in Alpine, New Jersey. So as you go over the George Washington Bridge today, that is Alpine. Now, when they lived there, they had to go across on a ferry from Yonkers. So times have changed, but it's definitely a very wealthy, beautiful community even today. And this is a magnificent tapestry, 17th century Flemish, from the Astor estate. Pair of chairs from the same estate. And here is that famous house on Fifth Avenue. They acquired rooms as well for the art museum from the same estate. And this is the Marble House installation. This is the Gothic room I just mentioned to you. And of course, many of our pieces are in Gallery 3, 4, and 5 in the art museum. So it's a magnificent collection of decorative arts. So this is the living room in 1926 or 7. These are Gordy paintings that he acquired, the only figurative paintings by Gordy anywhere. Many items from that Marble House estate. And of course, one of our most important paintings, The Building of a Palace, Piero di Cosimo. This is definitely one of our finest paintings, and that came from Marble House as well. And it's nice, I've worked at the museum so long, all the curators of these estates have been dear friends for 30 years. So one of my best friends is the curator of all those estates in Newport, Rhode Island. And he's been a wonderful aspect to helping guide me through the restoration of the building with furniture as well as wall treatments and having things repaired. Here's a wonderful image of Charles and Edith. He was very important to our community as well. He was developing Main Street, the district where the courthouse is today. He donated the property for the Sarasota County Courthouse to be built. He was building the Terrace Hotel that's right behind it. He was the president of the Chamber of Commerce at this time. He was very involved and loved Sarasota as a community. And this is their estate. This is the original entryway with this wonderful entry all the way down to his waterfront home. Now for him, he hired Wisconsin architects, Kloss, Shepard, and Kloss. And that's a very important architect for Wisconsin, who had done many fantastic estates there. The Pabst Mansion is by him. Very beautiful estates. So every house that he has had built for he and his family throughout the country had been designed by Alfred Kloss, who was one of his Masonic brothers. You can see how beautiful. This is faced in the most beautiful Georgia pink marble. And so there's your entry all the way down to that arch. It's such a shame New College took this out when they purchased the property in 1960. And I hope someday that they will see its beauty and put it back. New College is a wonderful institution, and I think it's growing, and I think it probably is more sensitive to its history now. You can see the three estates side by side. This one was $1.5 million. This one was $750,000, and it has an attachment here that's called, this is the breezeway where they had tea parties right here. And then the marble mansion for Charles and Edith was $880,000. Now we're talking in 1925, 1926. This is a great deal of money. The average salary in 1925 or 6, I think, was $2,100. So this is enormous money. This is the back view. New College has added this So this was put on to be a cafeteria for the students in the 60s. The original loggia, which is spectacular, still very much intact. And the living room. And you can see it's a more comfortable plan than Katazan. It's much more family oriented. And you can see how the mansions here, this is how the water was dredged so they could bring the yachts up to both houses. Charles and Edith had one called the Symphonia, and of course, John and Mabel had the Zalaphus. This is the Symphonia, and she would have races with Mabel. So they really were very close. They were very much, they very much enjoyed each other. And when, of course, Mabel passed away, John remarried, and she embraced the second wife as well. So this is the original drawing for the Terrace Hotel. That's, of course, next to the Sarasota County Courthouse. It's another government building today, but it was a 10-story bank and apartments. And Dwight James Baum designed this building, which is really spectacular. 117-foot tower, so beautiful, and was just really the central part of downtown, created to be Mediterranean revival in this incredible rich texturing. You know, the stucco finish, the barrel tile. It was very much like Addison Meisner was doing on the East Coast. So they were duplicating that feeling on this coast, and it was very much like Hollywood was doing as well. And of course, both of them wanted to bring the winter quarters to Sarasota as the bust happened in Sarasota. As the community was suffering from the lack of sales and property, John definitely decided to bring the winter quarters here to create an atmosphere very much like Disney today, where it was the #1 attraction for Florida. So it was a zoo, it was actual circus acts that you could watch. It was a brilliant idea to help the economy. All of the people that had lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, had to move here, so it increased the population. And so when the Ringlings moved here in 1911, there was only 840 people. So you can see why he was so sold on creating this as a community. He was part of the actual growth of the whole area. It's so sad this is no longer here. And of course, he was building the art museum, which is such a wonderful aspect of his history in Sarasota. They completed Katazan in 1926 and immediately started on the art museum. It was completed in 1930, and so they are standing in the courtyard of the art museum with Mr. Spivey, who was the director of Southern College, now known as Florida Southern College. And John Ringling worked with him to open the Ringling College of, which is Ringling College of Art and Design today, which was then the Ringling School of Art. So it's a wonderful part of our history that he opened both of them the same day. So he was unable to have the art school attached to his art museum like he originally planned. But he had lived through so many aspects of losing Mabel, losing a lot during, of course, the Great Depression. So he really had to find ways of finding the money to actually achieve what they wanted, which was to start the school. And so it's just a wonderful history for the community that he kept plugging along until he actually was able to achieve that. This is the original building. And of course, it's still there today. It's their, I think it's, is it the, not the Searing? It's definitely a beautiful interior. John H. Phillips is the architect of the art museum. He hired him to do the interiors of this old hotel that he acquired for the taxes, basically, and had it reconfigured to become a school. And it had 70 rooms, a cafeteria, and really created a wonderful atmosphere for the beginning of the school. So you can see the art museum is as spectacular today as it was the day it was opened. You can see John here in the courtyard. It has all of these incredible archways, doorways, marble columns. It was just a spectacular building when it opened, and truly John Ringling's vision. Here's the original drawings by John H. Phillips. He's always been a mystery to me because he's so elusive as far as to find history on him. I know he wrote for different architectural magazines, but there's very little real information to pull up about him. There's a lot of buildings by him in Chicago and New York. His main offices were on Fifth Avenue. And John Ringling definitely liked his work and admired him. And of course, Mabel was involved in the courtyard because she was a gardener, and they loved laying out this Renaissance-style central courtyard. This is Gallery 13, another historic room that was purchased and brought here from Florence. And you can see original windows that had been all the way up and down on the north and south side of the art museum. That's all been blocked in by the first director. But this is a wonderful view before any of that has happened. And this is John Ringling North. Here it is today. When we did the restoration of this building, I was part of the team that oversaw this. And so when this room was restored, we had on this side a fiberglass wall created to match the historic carved Florentine panel. So it's been quite an experience watching it blossom over the years. This is the original building it came from. And the Rubens Gallery is fashioned from this wonderful estate, the Grosvenor House. John Ringling acquired those wonderful cartoons. This is the actual historic building it came from. So this is such a beautiful image. And here it is in the background, hanging in that estate with the family portrait. And here it is today. And then, of course, these are the rooms that he acquired from the Astor estate. This is the cream salon. There it is today. And then this was the actual dining room in the estate. And here it is. The Astor's front gate. And then the Huntington estate was on Fifth Avenue next to the Waldorf Astoria. So this is a magnificent estate that was torn down as well. And he combined 2 rooms into Gallery 21. So this wonderful marble frieze, that is by Carl Bitter, one of the most important of the sculptors in Manhattan that worked for the Vanderbilts and the Astors, doing all of their fireplaces and this type of decorative friezes. So he acquired the frieze in this room and the doorway and fireplace from another. And you can see here's the frieze installed. So it's a wonderful aspect of saving a lot of New York history. They loved Manhattan, and they actually have saved it for many generations to come. This is a beautiful trono that was part of the Holford estate, and this was the house it had been in. This was from Darlington, which was the Mahwah, New Jersey estate. There it is. Mabel must have loved this house because a great deal of the furnishings and cut-a-zon are from this estate. And it is just recently sold to a private resident in Mahwah. And then I'm ending with the images of the original tombs for the Ringlings. This was never achieved, unfortunately, probably because he passed away without it being solid in his estate and all of his records, what he wanted done. It wasn't laid out particularly clear enough. So he was never actually interred in this area. But now we've opened up his gravesite that's on our property. As of 1991, they were brought back. I had a sculpture of Flora placed behind the headstones so that it would have some beauty for a very discreet, quiet area. Now, are there any questions?
Where were they brought back from?
They had been in New Jersey. You know, their summer home was in Alpine. So she was actually in one of their local cemeteries in not a permanent vault at all. So unfortunately, they were in temporary vaults until the 1991 time period. So she died in 29, he died in 36, and Ida Ringling died in 1950, and all three of them were in temporary vaults until the nephews decided to actually have them buried. That's a very strange story. That's not what I want to go into. No questions about that, please. Yes?
This is a rumor that I've heard. Besides the yachts, did he also have gondolas that he took people out on?
Yes, so Mabel had gondolas painted on the ceiling of the playroom. That's the third floor.
I mean, physically in
But
the water.
she actually had them painted there and had them in the bayfront as well. They had an island that had been dredged to drop off all the building materials. And so once the buildings were all completed, she used that island to have as her gondola island. Very true.
How did they initially finance circuses?
How did they finance? They started out very small and immediately joined another circus that had been very well established. And the owner of that circus passed away the first year that they joined with them. And so they assumed the property of all of the performers and animals. So that became their circus. So
Where did the animals go to
where did the animals go to when?
in winter?
Oh, to Bridgeport, Connecticut, to the winter quarters.
Wasn't it too cold for them?
You know, I'm not sure. They had buildings constructed. First, they had them in Baraboo, Wisconsin. So that was their winter quarters to begin with. And then as they expanded, Bridgeport became a very large aspect to their history. And so then John brought them in 1927 to this community.
In Venice? In Venice?
No, it was actually where Glen Oaks Manor is today. And then it moved to Venice eventually. Any other questions?
Did they have a Ringling office building somewhere?
He had many offices. On Main Street, he had an office. He had offices above the Bank of Sarasota. He was on the second level of the Bank of Sarasota. He was also next to the Ringling Hotel. There was a building that everyone knows as the Carl Bickle Estate. It's a very small Mediterranean building. That was Owen Burns, John Ringling's, and Dwight James Baum, their official offices. Then, of course, on St. Armand's. So he had many offices.
Was he penniless when he died?
No, you know, that's really a sad misrepresentation. He may have been cash poor at the moment when he died, but he was still worth $23 million worth of property. So he was very famous for having 100,000 acres of oil in Oklahoma and ranch land in Montana. He had huge holdings of all of that. And the family still own a great deal of the oil wells. So no, he wasn't really poor. He didn't have a lot of cash flow, but he definitely was still worth a great deal of money. I wouldn't call him poor.
Is the estate self-financing now, or is it receive a lot of support from the state?
We still get a great deal of support from FSU and the state, but we are very much stronger now than we had been in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We really had a very difficult time because the state didn't understand our needs. And so now that we have 440,000 people as touring our property, we definitely have a much stronger reserve financially.
Did he have children with the second wife?
No. He was 64 and she was 32. And they were not happily married, so it wasn't a long-lived relationship.
Here's another rumor. Did they have frog breeding ponds in the basement?
Frog breeding pond, that's a new one. Interesting. I'll have to remember that one.
They like frog legs.
No, I've never heard that one before.
All right, one more over here.
When was the David statue put in?
That would have been for the 1930, when the building was completed in 1930 and opened in 1931 permanently for the art museum.
Mabel was responsible for that?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. She was obviously involved in the art museum being built. She was the artistic aspect of the couple. She's the one that had the sensitivity and love for art and beauty. And I think John became more enamored with collecting those 6 years. He did become a connoisseur. But to begin with, I don't think he was as interested in all of that. So, but all of those sculptures came from Naples, Italy, from the Karatsu Foundry. And that's a famous foundry that copied all the most famous sculptures all over Europe. And so you could actually acquire the sculpture that you would like that would be in the Vatican or some of the other major sites. And I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. They actually had an office in Kansas City, Missouri for Karatsu. And it's known as the City of Fountains because it's all those same bronze, wonderful fountains with horses with water spraying out, and it's quite lovely. It's a wonderful, our collection of Karatsu is the largest in the country outside of the Getty.
This is the second time I've heard you speak, and I want to say you're amazing. No, I'm serious. Your knowledge and your
Well, thank you.
I could listen to you for hours. Great job.
Well, thank you.
I was just wondering how the Ringling Hotel fit into Ringling's business. Was this part of his business, or was this something that just took the name?
Well, Owen Burns was his partner, and Owen Burns had originally built the El Vernona Hotel, which was a 150-room, wonderful luxury hotel where the Ritz-Carlton is today on 41. So that was built, and financially, unfortunately, when it opened in 1926, I believe, it was not successful. They had hired someone that was not particularly a good manager. And so it was not doing well and was being foreclosed on. And so John Ringling purchased it in foreclosure in 1929, which really ended his relationship with his partner, Owen Burns. It was a really sad aspect to their relationship. Owen Burns is really a wonderful history for Sarasota. His daughter has shared so much information with the museum. She's quite lovely. Harriet Bernstein is her name.
What you have mentioned is when the headquarters were in Sarasota, the Ringlings opened it up on Sundays like a zoo, free to the citizens to come in.
Oh, and definitely, and also, there's so many things I haven't said because there's not enough time, but he also let the museum be free of charge too. You just paid for parking. So I think it was $0.25 to park. So, I mean, how lovely to do that and then to actually gift all of that to the people of Florida. I mean, that's really quite a vision, and he could have sold many of the paintings and had a great deal of money at the end of his life. But he chose to keep that because it represented that beautiful Mable Ringling to him. And it says the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art. So it's a wonderful history that he maintained until his very last breath.
We have one more cash, we have to just pull a raffle number for Alexandria, the Sunken City this evening.
Oh, lovely.